Author Donna J. Jodhan presents The Christmas Box Set Number 2. If you have not yet listened to Donna's 12 Days of Christmas Box Set Number 1, then you owe it to yourself to do so. This box set is made of 12 wonderful stories for the Christmas holiday season. They are all filled with mystery, suspense, and they all have happy endings. Now, Donna presents her second 12 Days of Christmas box set, 12 stories with wild imaginings. Donna paints pictures of hope, peace, and a bright future for the world. She develops amazing stories that will warm and thrill the hearts of the listener. Sit back now and enjoy Donna's 12 stories. You can email your thoughts and feedback to Donna at donnajodhan@gmail.com. Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to everyone.
Ho, 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 everybody. It is author Donna Jodhan, also known as Detective DJ, and I hope that everybody is enjoying their special holiday time, because this is the time of year when we share, give, receive, greet, and there's so much love and peace that we need to keep sharing this around the world, especially at this time when there's so many things going on, so many wars, so many unfortunate things, and we really need to do our part to bring cheer, especially to our kids, to our seniors, and to those who are less fortunate. So, what are we going to do for this year? And my solution to this is to share my stories with you that I wrote. It's called the 12 Days of Christmas Box Set Number 2. And I have already shared 8 stories with you. And here they are. Santa's Special Christmas Sleigh was my first episode. The second was The President's Christmas Package. The third was Santa's Super Christmas Kids. The fourth was Santa's Magic Marvels. The fifth was The President's Christmas Ice Palace. The sixth was Santa's Super Christmas Dream. The seventh was Santa's Super Sea Rescue. And the eighth was The President's Christmas Cruise. Now it is time for episode 9, and this one is entitled Santa's Super Christmas Cradle. And here is a description. Santa, and as we all know, has always had an extra special soft heart for kids, especially so for the newborns and the little ones in cradles. And Mrs. Claus, his wife, is really no different. And at this time, at this specific Christmas time, this couple does something marvelous, something extra special in order to fulfill their heart's desires. For this year, Mr. and Mrs. Claus put their minds together to come up with something a little bit different, with some twists. They run a survey, and at the end they have an answer, but not without some twists and turns along the way. Santa and his wife need to overcome some adversity, and someone needs to come to their help. Someone needs to rescue them before everything could end in total joy and happiness. Okay, let's get started. Part 1. Santa's Worldwide Survey. Santa has always thought that it would be fun to run a worldwide survey to figure out what folks are really thinking. Not just the kids, but the adults as well. Not just the rich and famous, but the less fortunate as well. Not just the ordinary child, but the one with special needs or disability, not just in North America, but really around the world, from England to all of Europe, from India to China, from the Koreas to Thailand and Taiwan, from Japan and Southeast Asia, from Australia and New Zealand, from Africa and South America and the Caribbean. And oh yes, Santa wants to hear from as many folks as he possibly can. Santa has also taken the bold step of even surveying the world leaders. And this is going to be very tricky, because you know those world leaders. They could either cooperate or simply choose not to cooperate. But we know that Santa has some very secret ways to get what he wants. And this will be no different. Stay tuned. Now, this means that Santa has to find a way to get his survey out, to circulate far and wide, to ask the right type of questions, to be able to analyze the responses, and most of all, to come up with a plausible work plan. Oh yes, lots to do, but Santa is very prepared. And Mrs. Claus, his helpers, his elves, and his reindeer are all ready for action. Even his special kids who he adopted several years ago and who continue to attend the Santa school have been all brought into the fray. Santa's friends and family are also all on board. Santa has made this a 2-year project while continuing along with his other initiatives. And surprisingly enough, he has managed to keep everyone together. Santa and his team have designed and created a very snazzy survey. He has deployed some very special social media gurus who know how to use Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, plus other social media and popular platforms. And he has even managed to obtain the cooperation of these companies from their CEOs. And we will say that these CEOs are all very, very anxious to gain popularity on behalf of their companies and to raise their profiles as they want to take part in this very unusual initiative, because they believe that this could bring not just benefits to their respective companies, but as well to show how humanitarian they are to the world. For this initiative, Santa has enlisted the help of his very high-profile friend, an investigative reporter, Chris Kringle, and he is the president of the International Chris Kringle Foundation, and Josh Reisman, who is also one of the most world-renowned international investigative reporters, and of course his friends Marco and Nicholas, who live at Bobbin Square. Santa has managed to post scouts any and everywhere, and now he starts to circulate his survey on social media, all across the internet, the newspapers, on TV and radio, and soon requests for interviews start pouring in. Here is where Santa excels best at what he does, for in short order, he manages to convince some of the world leaders to be spokespersons, from the King of England and the Prime Minister of England, the Presidents of the United States, France, and the Chancellor of Germany, the Emperor of Japan and the Prime Minister of Canada, leaders from Europe, Australia, and New Zealand, Africa, Asia, and even third world countries, to even the presidents of Russia and China, and even the president of the Ukraine, and the Pope, and more world leaders soon follow. Wow! Santa has created a big stir around the world, and this initiative is well orchestrated so as not to fizzle out. It lasts for 3 months, and it has the much desired effect, and this is how it was at this very special moment. Part 2. Santa and his team analyze the results. This global initiative is on schedule to take place 2 years from now. The snazzy survey has been circulated and millions of responses have been collected, both online and via email. Santa's massive staff has been kept very busy sorting and analyzing and gathering, and Santa has had to double his staff in order to meet the requirements of this special initiative. And now the initiative is about 15 months away from being launched. It is time for Santa and Mrs. Claus to host a special conference to view the results and to come up with a plan. And on an early fall day, the North Pole plays host to some arriving. The Clauses make this meeting a very small gathering because Santa believes that small gatherings get things done much more quickly and efficiently than those larger groups. Santa also wants to limit this gathering to very trusted friends and allies because he is very aware that somewhere out there, those so-called 3 wise men are just waiting to pounce and to disrupt and put this initiative in harm's way. We already know what these 3 wise men are capable of doing or trying to do, and it is better not to take any chances, but we should also remember that they are very capable indeed and have their own devious allies everywhere. Santa first decides to hold this secret meeting on a small Santa island somewhere off the North Pole. It is very secluded and very pretty at this time of the year, but he has to scrub this plan when his guards spot an unfamiliar boat lurking off of this island. It turns out, however, that it is only a pleasure boat gone astray. The meeting is then held in the foothills of a nearby community, and it lasts for 2 days. Santa and their friends spend their time debating the results, and after some very meaningful discussions, they are able to come up with a possible initiative. It was not an easy task to perform this analysis, as the number of responses was simply overwhelming, and the number of notable causes for consideration was also overwhelming. Moreover, many of the causes were so notable, and Santa and his team wanted to make sure that the final cause, when chosen, would be one that the world could get behind. They also knew that, of course, there would be those naysayers, but Santa was used, and he was more than ready. And the final decision, but he would always consult his inner circle before announcing it, his wife and his family and those trusted friends, Chris Sprinkle and Josh Reeson, and his family made up the inner circle. Just as the meeting was about to wrap up, Santa's guards managed to stop an intruder, and they learned that she was working for the 3 wise men. They were not sure how much she had managed to learn, and they could only hope that it was not much. And this is how it was at this very moment. Part 3. Shaping of a master plan. There were 4 important questions for this group to answer fully. What to offer to the world? A present that brought lots of joy and happiness to those receiving it, and to those who would benefit from it. To whom? To those who needed it most. And it was overwhelmingly decided that it would be to the youngest citizens of the world. This is what the global survey had also overwhelmingly confirmed. How would it be given out? Via a variety of ways, ranging from agency to drop-off presents, and from world leaders to media outlets. When would it be given out? Just before Christmas Eve and Christmas Day? This special present to the youngest citizens of the world would not be available in any store or in any shop. It would not be for sale, and it could not be duplicated anywhere. Santa had gotten the assurance of all world leaders that this would not happen in their country. This, Santa knew, was beyond a mammoth effort and promise. But, by golly, he was going to do his best to ensure that it happened, and that no one would take advantage of this unique present to the youngest ones. Santa had already gotten wind that those 3 wise men were simply waiting to intervene, and he was ready and waiting to thwart any plans that they had. Finally, the decision as to where to manufacture this unique gift had to be decided upon, and after much discussion, a very secret location was chosen. The rest of the world would only be told that manufacturing would be carried out at east of the sun and west of the moon. It would not be at the North Pole or anywhere close to the North Pole. It would not be close to Bobbin Square, where Marco and Nicholas lived, nor would it be close to any of Chris Kringle's sprawling complexes. No, it would not be in any particular country or in any particular part of the world. The final location chosen was a well-guarded secret, known only to a trusted few. A location that would accommodate this mammoth initiative, and very well hidden from prying eyes and those nosy media folk. A plan was hatched. Santa and his team were all happy and satisfied, but lurking in the shadows was another small group just waiting to be a part of this master plan. But this was for the very wrong reason, and this is how it was at this very moment. Part 4. Twists and turns. Of course, there were several twists and turns to overcome. Some world leaders kept demanding favors in return for their support, while others kept pushing for manufacturing to take part in their neck of the woods. Media outlets kept pushing for more and more details, and several times Santa and his team had to change directions. Then there were those countries that tried to justify why they should be given special treatment, and Santa and his team had to work overtime to keep things on track. It came down to very chosen ones to run this gigantic global affair. Some noses were naturally left out of joint, but somehow Santa managed to appease them all. Don't ask what he had to do to accomplish harmony of this magnitude. And as he would later reflect to Mrs. Claus, family members, and close friends, he somehow managed to give away not too much in return for cooperation. Above all, he managed to keep his initiative on track and to follow his passion to bring peace, joy, and cheer to the world. This was his heart's desire. This was his heart and passion. At the same time, Santa also had to fend off some real threats from those three wise men and their determined gang with no good intentions. It was hard not to hide this global initiative from them, and they had made several attempts to sabotage many of the survey responses and to destroy several of the written ones. They had sent several of their own men to seize and burn responses and had made several attempts to intercept some of the online responses or to infiltrate some of the online platforms. But for the most part, they had been stopped. And as Santa would later remember, it took great lengths to keep everything pristine. Then the three wise men had used some very interesting tactics to sabotage things. They posted their men at the doorstep of the North Pole, on the outskirts of Bobbin Square, where Marco and Nicholas lived, close to several mansions of Kris Kringle, and they even took to harassing Sandy Claus along with Santa's Toyon and Stefan. They even managed to infiltrate some of Santa's workers, but thanks to quick detection, they were stopped. They attempted to set up listening posts and satellite stations to try and monitor activities, but thanks to vital assistance from some of the world leaders, the three wise men were somehow stopped in their tracks. Santa would later reflect that the entire intervention process to thwart the three wise men was a stupendous effort, and never have done it with all of the help from so many friends, world leaders, family, and staff. However, Santa knew in his heart that it would only be a matter of time before these three wise men were able to do something horrible. So the goal here was to minimize what they could do, and this is how it was at this very moment. Part 5. Santa's Roadmap. So the location of the manufacturing was decided upon. The product specs were agreed upon, security was put in place, and now the initiative would begin in earnest. 15 months before the due date, Santa also had to ensure that his own regular initiatives would continue, and for this he had depended on Sandy Claus and his cousins, Santa Stoyan and Santa Stefan, to help him do this, along with his trusted friends, Chris Kringle, Josh Reisman, Marco, and Nicholas. And the official launch took place on a late September morning, not at the North Pole, but at the location that was dubbed East of the Sun and West of the Moon. For this was what many were led to believe. The launch was low-key, and the media almost missed it, but at the last minute, it was televised around the world. First things first, the pre-activities had to take place, and it showed Santa and his family walking towards a jumbo jet, surrounded by big, beefy security guards, wearing the uniforms of several countries. Flags of these countries fluttered on flagpoles surrounding the runway, but no one could really tell where this runway was located. Then a shot of a gigantic area filled with materials, buildings, and other things and vehicles was shown by media outlets. All that the viewer could see was that this area extended from miles and miles and miles. Fields of flowers and lush meadows. An image of a deep blue sky was shown, and another image of a blue horizon followed. And then the viewers saw another image of a deep blue ocean with the surface as smooth as glass, then a golden sun shining down, and then finally a smiling Santa holding hands with Mrs. Claus standing at the doors just before they closed. All of these images were carefully crafted and displayed and carefully crafted so that no one could really tell where they were taken. Only a very few knew, and they were meant to hide the real location of the actual launch. The final image was that of the jumbo jet, rising gracefully and quickly disappearing into the clouds. That was it for now, and this is how it was at this very special moment. Part 6. Santa reaches the workplace. All on board were prepared for a long and interesting journey, and the jumbo jet would only take its passengers part of the way. The captain made sure that everyone was made comfortable, and soon the air hostesses were serving a sumptuous meal. Everyone ate heartily and then settled back to enjoy drinks and movies. Some watched the movies, but many, including Santa, slept. However, Santa did manage to do some work on his laptop before falling asleep, and during his sleep he had begun to snore, and Mrs. Claus had to nudge him to wake up. Santa took some teasing from those around him. The jumbo jet journey took about 5 hours, and Santa and his family and friends noticed that for the most part, the jumbo jet had traveled across deserted lands and oceans. Of course, Santa had been given a map of their route, and he had only shared this with his wife and family. Then the jumbo jet had started to descend, and the captain had asked passengers to fasten their seat belts for arrival. Of course, he did not tell the passengers where they were landing, and the passengers knew better than to ask. The jumbo jet was met on a deserted runway by several large buses painted in the Santa Claus colors, and the runway was surrounded by dozens of guards who were fully armed and ready for action if necessary. The passengers had boarded the buses quietly, and large beefy attendants had stowed their luggage away on other buses. Then the convoy was off and driving quickly across a deserted highway with lush green fields on either side and lakes in the distance. The bus ride was not very long, and soon the passengers were disembarking and being led to a very large train, one that was an absolute sight to behold. As Santa and his friends and family would later reflect, it was a train, the likes of which were never seen before, simply for its appearance and capacity, magnificent, sleek, and shiny. A train that definitely warranted pictures to be taken, but the passengers had been told beforehand that no pictures would be allowed to be taken until they arrived at their final destination. And even so, all pictures needed to be vetted before they would be allowed to be posted and circulated. Of course, Santa and Mrs. Claus knew everything about everything beforehand, and they knew what was going to happen at every step. But did they really? This is how it was at this very special moment in time. Part 7. The Special Sky Train. The shrill of the whistle was followed by a gentle jerk of the train, and then it was off. Passengers stared through the window as the train slowly departed from the deserted station, picking up speed as it left the station, and then it was on its way full steam ahead. Everyone received thick, flashy folders containing lots of information. Santa and Mrs. Claus walked through the aisles, handing these out. And Sandy Claus and Santa's Stefan and Stoyan helped to distribute these, and they were quite thick, with lots of information for the passengers to read and instructions to follow. The folders had to be loaded onto trolleys, which Santa and his helpers pulled through the aisles. And as most of them had started to wonder, they did not really know where they were being taken. But they all trusted Santa and knew that he would never lead them the wrong way. And each of them had voluntarily and readily decided to go forward with this mission. They had readily volunteered for this top secret mission. The passengers had learned that the train was well fortified with lots of stores and food for a 3-day journey, and it was estimated that there were about almost 1,000 folks on board. That included both workers, staff, and Santa's special helpers and team. Each passenger was assigned sleeping areas as well as areas for doing work other things. And there were tables for doing their work, and a washroom and a shower. This was much luxurious and greatly resembled a hotel room. But the area was very compact, with just enough room to carry out the necessities. Of course, there was Wi-Fi service, but alas, there were no televisions. Radio reception was not of the best. Instead, there was piped music throughout the train and movies in certain areas where people could watch. The dining areas or the dining cars were well equipped, but a little bit on the small side. And passengers had to book times for their meals. The servers and the attendants were all smartly dressed in red and white Santa, and there was a small medical staff on board. Finally, there was a small lounge where folks could meet and chat, and there were some tables for playing cards and other board games. The passengers had been told that altogether their time away from home would be about a month. It was now early October, and if all had gone to plan, they would be making their return journey in early November. However, some of them would make their return in early December, and then a fresh set of folks would be making the same journey in early December, replacing the departing ones. And these rotations would continue on a monthly basis until the end of the summer the following year. The target completion of this gigantic global project was scheduled for Labor Day of the following year, and Santa and his team would take turns coming and going, and to monitor progress and to make sure that everyone was doing well. Santa's main goal was to make sure that his own annual missions would be on track, but at the same time to keep a close eye on things at east of the sun and west of the moon. And this is how it was at this very moment. Part 8. Santa runs into trouble. And as they say, something was bound to happen sooner or later, no matter how much planning took place and no matter how many precautions were taken. It all came down to a possible Mother Nature sense of humor. And as Santa would later reflect, this is exactly what happened. And when it did happen, Santa's team had to scramble very quickly and to spring into action to save the day. There were about 10 more months to D-Day, as Santa would refer to it in his neck of the woods, this being the day for the launch of the gigantic global gala. And on a late February winter's day, when snowbanks were still quite high and the winds were still very cold and chilly, Santa had decided to take a walk on his own, as he had wanted to clear his head as well as to get some fresh air. Santa had decided to visit his friends Marco and Nicholas at Bobbin Square, and for the past few days he had thoroughly enjoyed meeting with folks at Bobbin Square, and as well visiting with the Sumner and Gleason families. Both families had welcomed the big man with open arms, and the kids, especially little Marco and Alexa, had had so much fun hanging out with Santa. Little Marco and Alexa had spent several evenings listening to Santa and learning so much from him, and they did not want to think that in a few more days Santa would be leaving them to return to the North Pole in order to prepare for another visit to east of the sun and west of the moon. Santa had regaled everyone with stories of the complex at east of the sun and west of the moon, making sure not to give away any secrets. And he had also spent a lot of time with the other kids at Bobbin Square, playing with them, teaching them, and just hanging out with them. Santa had been there for almost a week now, and he had planned to stay for a few more days before leaving to return to the North Pole and then traveling to the base at east of the sun and west of the moon. Santa had turned down offers from the kids to walk with him and had started out on his solo stroll, heading to some of the trails where he hoped to gather his thoughts, clear his head, and to re-energize himself. The sun had already started to set, and Santa had promised his host that he would not take a very long walk. But when after an hour he did not return, Marco and Nicholas had started to worry a bit. After another half hour and Santa had not returned, Marco and Nicholas had started to get really concerned and had begun to try and reach Santa on his special cell. Santa did not answer his cell, and soon Marco and Nicholas had decided to go looking for the big man. Somehow, Santa had found himself in a clearing, surrounded by some very nice-looking leafy caves. They looked like some leafy-type caves, and he had decided to go exploring. And he had entered one of these caves and had turned on his powerful flashlight, which he had taken out from his kit, which he always took with him when he went on walks. And soon he was looking at some beautiful wonders of nature. Santa was looking at various formations, or various patterns of rock formation, wild plants and flowers, and beautiful waterfalls, and so many other creations of nature, so magnificent to behold. Soon Santa became lost in what he was seeing, and then he had started to grow tired, and the pungent fragrances of flowers had begun to make him sleepy. Santa knew that he had to get back to his hosts, but he had started to struggle to stay awake. Santa decided to sit for a bit on one of the lush green banks, and soon he was nodding off. Hence he did not hear the ringing of his cell phone. Instead, he had started to dream, and this is how it was at this very moment. Part 9. Santa is rescued. And while Santa dreamed, Marco and Nicholas had started to look for him. The two dads took the older boys with them, Tristan and Creason, and little Dick and Scotty. They also brought Flair and Flambeau with them, as these two special dogs were no ordinary dogs. They had been trained as guide dogs and rescue dogs, as Nicholas had been insistent that they be trained. As Nicholas was vision impaired, he felt that it was important that Flair and Flambeau should be ready should he ever need any help. They were the family dogs of the Sumners, but they might have also been the family dogs of Nicholas and his family. So this party of 6 had set out. Brothers Little Nick and Scotty and their dad Marco taking one path with Flair, and brothers Tristan and Creason, and their dad Nicholas, taking the other path with Flambeau. They decided to use Santa's intended trail to start with, but they were very mindful that Santa could have wandered elsewhere. In addition, Marco and Nicholas had rounded up some volunteer helicopter pilots from amongst the folks at Bobbin Square, and they were all set to join the search. The searchers had searched for Santa for over an hour now, and thus far no success. The small groups had kept close communication with each other and with the helicopter pilots. Flair and Flambeau had gone about their business with gusto and zeal, but they too had not turned up any leads on the whereabouts of Santa. The sun had set for about 3 hours now, and the temps had begun to drop markedly. It was now at the freezing level, and Marco and Nicholas had begun to really worry. They had decided to put coats and boots on the dogs so as to keep them as warm as possible. Everyone was wearing full winter clothes, parkas, boots, and gloves, and they were also aware that Santa was not wearing proper winter clothes. Yes, he was wearing a winter jacket, but his boots may not have been warm enough, and he had not been wearing a winter scarf or hat when he went out. Santa was jolted awake by feelings of coldness, traveling from his toes and moving up to his knees. He had awakened, stretched, yawned, and had rubbed his eyes. And then slowly reality had started to set in. As he had sat up slowly, he realized that he had no idea where he was. Santa was normally known not to panic easily, but now he had started to feel pangs of panic creeping in. Santa had tried to rise from his sitting position, but he was finding it difficult because his feet were quite numb, and he knew that it was from the coldness around him. Santa reached for the cell in his kit, but he quickly realized that he could not find a connection. For some reason, the battery was dead. Earlier on, Marco and Nicholas had tried to reach Santa's cell, and it had rung, but Santa did not hear it because he had been sound asleep, so no cell phone connection, and a pair of legs that were quite numb. Santa knew that he was in trouble now. What to do? And as the searchers continued to search, Santa had begun to think methodically. He managed to drag his walking kit close to him, and with numbing fingers he opened it and found what he was looking for. He did not need his powerful flashlight to help him, and in any case, the flashlight had lost a lot of its power because Santa had left it on while he was asleep. Santa managed to place the little gadget between his fingers. He found the button and pressed it firmly. Presto! It hummed into operation, and soon it was emitting high beeps at 10-second intervals. Santa did his best to hold the gadget between his clammy palms. He prayed that someone would soon hear it, and then the beeps were picked up. Flair and Flambeau heard it first. Almost at the same time, these two well-trained dogs stopped in their tracks Then their tails and ears went up in unison. Then they begin to bark, their barks echoing. And Marco on one path and Nicholas on the other path began to be hopeful. The dogs were allowed to take over the search, moving forward quickly and barking, and the others followed. They ran, stopped, and then ran again, and then they were leaping and throwing themselves at some sort of green-looking cave. Flare and Flambeau came together at the opening, and there they stopped. They waited for the others, and then Marco and Nicholas were at the entrance. They could hear the high beeps more clearly. It was very sharp. And it was Nicholas who first yelled that it was Santa's beeper, as he had developed this for Santa a few years ago. Everyone burst into the cave almost all at once, and there they found a pale-looking Santa doing his best to fend off the coldness to his body. But Santa was already beginning to lose consciousness. The older boys had brought extra parkas, boots, and gloves with them, and they quickly made a makeshift bed for their friend, and then gingerly they laid Santa on it, and gently Santa was laid on the bed. And then they realized that his legs were numb from the cold, and he could not move them. Marco and Nicholas had set about to make a small fire, taking care to make sure that they did not catch the ends of any of the plants close by, and the rescue helicopters were summoned. Santa was taken back to the family complex, where doctors were waiting to tend to him. Santa would remain with the Sumners and the Gleasons for another week, before being allowed to return to the North Pole, where Mrs. Claus, the elves, the helpers, the reindeer, and the kids all waited anxiously, and of course Santa's own dogs, Yelly and Hamish. And this is how it was at this very moment. Part 10. The Super Christmas Cradle. And now it was early November, and in about 6 weeks the Super Christmas Cradle would be unveiled to the world, just in time for the grand global gala to be held on Christmas Eve. But the location of this grand global gala was still a mystery. The Super Christmas Cradle was fully tested. Millions of them were ready to be distributed around the world, and a fully recovered Santa, his family, and his friends were anxiously waiting for the big day to arrive. Pictures of the Super Christmas Cradle had already been circulated around the world via social media, the internet, and through the news media, TV, magazines, and everything else. The newspapers were cluttered with pictures of these Super Christmas Cradles. Features of this off-the-edge invention were still being kept a secret, except that it would be a cradle that would provide interaction and engagement between baby and toddler, and parents and nurses and healthcare professionals, medical staff, and all those engaged with engaging and communicating with baby and toddler. The world leaders kept to their commitment and acted as spokespersons for the unveiling of this invention, and many of them had managed to put their differences aside and posed with each other for grand photo ops, so that the world had to get used to the President of Russia posing with the President of the Ukraine, the President of the United States posing with the President of China, President or Prime Ministers of Canada and England posing with Presidents of Russia and China, leaders of Europe and Australia and New Zealand posing with leaders of Russia, China, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. And on it went for the next few weeks. The Pope and the King of England also got into the act, and the world simply could not believe what was happening. To the naked eye, the Super Christmas Cradle looked like any other ordinary cradle, large enough to accommodate a newborn baby and toddlers to 2 years. However, features of this bleeding edge invention would be unveiled at the Grand Global Gala, and the location from where it would be unveiled would be kept a top secret. And this is how it was at this very moment. Part 11. The Grand Global Gala. And the day was finally here. Ah, yes. Christmas Eve dawned bright and prosperous. Very early on this morning, millions of cradles were being distributed across and around the world. The world was treated to images of sleighs and helicopters, drones and aircrafts of all sizes, ships of all kinds and sizes, along with boats, all working to distribute Super Christmas cradles far and wide. Pictures of Santa, Mrs. Claus, and their reindeer driving sleighs, and the world leaders driving their own limos to distribute these Super Christmas sleighs, Christmas cradles, I should say. Santa's family and friends also got into the act, and images of the dogs Flair and Flambeau pulling sleds, and Santa's own dogs, Yelly and Hamish, doing the same, were distributed far and wide. These sleds were all overloaded with Super Christmas cradles, and then the moment had arrived. And then it was time to reveal to the world the top secret location of the Great Global Gala. And who else better than our beloved Santa to do this? There he was, surrounded by Mrs. Claus, his family, and his friends, elves, reindeer, and helpers, his beloved dogs, Santa's special team, snowbirds, dolphins, mermaids, and lambs. And oh yes, the world leaders being brought in by satellite links from their own country. And then, without any fanfare, the lights were momentarily dimmed, followed by a long drum roll, and then the unveiling of the top secret location. Yes, the moon shone brightly, and all of the party goers were standing on the moon, smiling, waving, and giving high fives to each other. And the world leaders were doing the same through their own satellite links. And then Santa had let out his characteristic ho, 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 followed by everyone around him shouting, "Hello, world!" was followed by helium balloons rising in the sky and confetti being spread everywhere, fireworks shooting high into the sky, and pictures of the moon being shown in the background. Moon dancers came out to celebrate, and they were all doing Michael Jackson's Moon Dance. The music was loud, rich, and lively, and then Mrs. Claus and Santa Claus began to do a moon waltz, and everyone else in the party followed. And then the world leaders had begun to chip in, showing off their own dancing skills with their partners, because they had practiced their dances long and hard, and their rehearsals had taken place on their top secret hideaway. Ice skaters and skiers joined in, and even a scene of a beautiful ocean shown on the moon, with surfers and swimmers showing off their skills. Many racing cars could be seen racing around on a large track, and then scores of doves and swans could be seen flying high into the sky. What a scene! Parades, dances, and so much to take in. Floats and trucks with those loyal workers who had worked so hard to make it all happen. The ones who had traveled so far to work on this grand global gala. However, the last 2 years, and to build millions of those super Christmas cradles, they had all given up their time to travel to the moon to make it happen. And this is how it was at this very moment. Part 12. As the world looked on, the world had later reflected that nothing like this had ever happened before. It would go down in history as when the world came together. Cooperation, commitment, dedication, and what else? And what made these super Christmas cradles so special? Very simple. Just these features made these super Christmas cradles so special. Parents, guardians, medical staff, and social workers, and all those engaged in communicating and engaging with a baby or toddler could now do so through this bleeding edge invention. The super Christmas cradle could be used to teach baby and toddler all about feelings and needs. And feelings and needs could be recognized much more easily. The super Christmas cradle would be used in so many different ways to engage and communicate, as a teaching tool and as a better way to improve medical needs and innovations. But most of all, it would become the new way for baby and toddler to communicate with the rest of the world and to be able to have nice new beds, warm and cozy, pleasant and enjoyable. It would ensure that babies and toddlers around the world would not be left out in the cold any longer. And a special feature, the super Christmas cradle was extremely versatile, as it had the ability to be converted back and forth from cradle to high chair and to tiny workstation with tiny desks and play area. And the party on the moon continued well into Boxing Day, with Santa and his party goers simply ripping it up. The end. I hope you enjoyed this specific episode, this special episode. I hope that everyone is having a great holiday time. Santa's super Christmas cradle. If only it were true, then babies and toddlers would have such a better future to communicate in a better way with all those communicating with them. Happy holidays, everyone, and see you for my 10th episode.